He has a 1-1 count. That one struck high. Left side. That one's going. That's out of here off the wall. You have to be kidding me. Fireworks. Here you go.
Andrew, everyone hates Mondays, but this is your reason not to hate Monday anymore. It is baseball season. It is a Monday, which means we've got new rankings on this special edition of High and Tight. Well, it'll be special every single week from now for the next few months until we crown our state champions. Hey, this is a special edition of High and Tight, but make sure you check out the normal version of High and Tight that Andrew and I will probably record later this week sometime whenever we can find some free time. We're busy covering all the action. We got to find some free time to sit down and talk about what's going on. But we're excited to be here today. Class 3A, we've got a ton of movement. In fact, let's see here. We've had just 3 teams inside the top 15 hold their ground. We've had teams jump up 4, down 5. We got one new team. We've got so much stuff to talk about. Stick with Andrew and I for the next 10-15 minutes, and we're going to tell you all about it. Starting with 15 through 11 in Class 3A, Week 1, brand new rankings. Let's do this thing. And as you can see, the new team in this week's rankings. Oh my gosh, Andrew, I've got a typo. I am 0 for 3 on typos. I added an O on Bondurant Farrar, and I even double checked it beforehand. That is not Boondurant Farrar. That is Bondurant Farrar. I promise you, I double checked this, and it did not work. Bondurant Farrar, nevertheless, you are the new team in our Class 3A rankings, averaging 10 runs per game across the first week of the season. Blue Jays are off to the races. Our other team rising extremely quickly is Bishop Heelan. Andrew, I think we kind of knew when we really looked deep into this Heelan team after the preseason rankings that this team had a ceiling a lot higher than number 15.
Yeah, and they've been kind of sneaky. I think the biggest thing that was last year, the way they ended the season, very disappointing. And then go, man, every year you get a little turnover, but you don't get a lot of turnover with this team. They're back at it. They're ready to go. They took down really, I believe, to be a strong Lamar's team, and they did it fairly easily here. Again, they had his 12 strikeout performance from sophomore standout Caleb LaFlavor, who we have talked about before. Ultimately, they outscored the Bulldogs 17-4, and they showed that when you do that, that means you're off to the right pace right away, and you can now dictate how things go. Right? You don't have to try and match someone else. You are the one that teams are trying to match. And you know what? I think that Bishop Heelan is going to prove a lot of us wrong, and a lot of the doubters wrong anyway. And they're going to prove our 3A ranker wrong and say, hey, we need to be up a little bit higher. So, yeah, I like how they came right out of the gates and say, hey, we need to be higher. Let's prove it.
Absolutely. Andrew, before we move on, few things here on this screen. We've got 3 teams that took a big dip. Now, it is very early in this season. Knoxville, Ballard, ADM, all those teams off to sub 500 starts. But again, week 1, our Class 3A ranker, we've got teams proving themselves. We've got teams taking some early season losses. There's going to be drastic movement. Everything is going to even out. We promise you. That's just how these rankings are going for now. Also, for the teams just on the outside, our Class 3A ranker is the only one that gives us an honorable mention. So I can see the fans of these teams just clicking out as soon as they see the screen and they don't see themselves. So for those that actually are tuning in and listening, here's your honorable mentions because they're not going to pop up on the screen. You're going to have to listen to me say it for you to hear your team name. Boone, Creston, Sadell, Sergeant Bluff Luton, Benton, Mount Pleasant, and Spencer. There's your little hodgepodge of Class 3A teams that are on the outside looking in. Our Class 3A ranker is saying, hey, I see ya. I see what you're doing. You're just not quite there yet, but keep doing what you're doing, and you're going to end up in that top 15 slot. So that's kind of cool. I like how our Class 3A ranker does that. Some new teams in there that we haven't talked about in a while. So excited to follow those guys as we keep moving on. Inside the top 10, where we had a lot of down teams trending down in this little group, while the next group, we've got a lot of teams trending upwards. Lewis Central at number 10, Xavier at number 9, Solon at number 8, DeWitt dropping down from 6 to 7. I don't think they played, so that's just a result from teams jumping them. And then we got Harlan at number 6. Now, Andrew, I think the story in this little group is Xavier. What a start for the Saints.
Yeah, I mean, they lead 3A with 41 RBIs. They have 61 total bases here on the mound, 31 strikeouts. And, this is a team that perennially has a top 10, 15 strength of schedule. And so we'll see how that continues to bear out. But, 3-2, people might say, oh, man, that's, just one above 500. But, they don't play cupcakes. And I'm not saying anybody really does. But man, Xavier is one of those teams that it goes up. Their conference slate is going to be really hard to match that as well. So yeah, they got a big test coming on up. I mean, I think this next week will really be the first prove it time for them. I mean, they have Iowa City, Liberty, Cedar Falls, and Solon coming on up. So I think this is to where they're either going to be sitting on the trampoline ready to shoot up, or the trampoline's going to give way on them. So we'll see how it ends up. But ultimately, yeah, they had a really impressive week 1.
Yeah, impressive week, and Andrew, they took number 1 to the wire in an absolute barn burner. If
Yeah.
they took them down, we could be looking at a bigger jump than even number 4. One more team that I want to talk about briefly before we get inside our top 5. The team that, looking back, I think had some really good wins this week that we maybe didn't post about or talk about. It's Harlan.
Yeah.
Really good start. Our Class 3A ranker is rewarding them, slotting them just outside the top 5. The Cyclones have been impressive in all facets, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, they started out against a strong Sioux City North squad. They took them to the shed. I mean, 18 hits and get this, 25 combined walks. I mean, they were patient at the plate. They did not let anything. And again, Sioux City North, one of the top pitching staffs that we have mentioned prior. So they got some stuff. And I know that the coaches poll doesn't necessarily have them as high, but I like Harlan. I like where they're at, and I think that last year was just the start of what's going to be several good runs to come for them.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into our top 5. Starting at number 5, a team, no movement, Assumption. 2-2 to start, but I don't know if you can count 2-2 with a doubleheader split against Moline. I mean, that's a team I know nothing about. I don't know if you somehow do, Andrew. But speaking
Yeah,
inside the state of Iowa, a win against Regina and a really tight loss against City High, which they led, I believe, for most of that game.
yeah, good.
Assumption. What do you think our Class 3A ranker saw to keep them here at this number 5 spot?
Well, Assumption again. You mentioned Moline, top school from out of state, and they
There you go.
that kind of that competition that's really really tough. And again, Assumption always has that connection there, and so it's one of those where I'm guaranteeing you 3A ranker when let's not count that as much, right? Let's count it, but man, it's still something that's out of the state, but nonetheless, it's worth value. And in the end, both of those two games that they split, they could have been on the other end of that. So they honestly could have came out unblemished. They could have had they could have had just one loss. So I think Assumption's on the right track. But mind you, they usually love to have a lot of seniors. They're usually a senior heavy roster at least the last 5 to 10 years. And unfortunately, they didn't have that the last couple years. So they're kind of coming on up, but I mean, again, I like everything Assumption has, so I agree with that at number 5.
Absolutely no movement here at number 5, but we do have movement inside of our top 5 in Class 3A, and it starts here with the Comets dropping down 1. Now, really, our ranker even says it right here on my explanation sheet. This is really not at fault of North Polk. It's just a matter of fact of a team jumping them. So there's your reasoning, North Polk fans. Water Tower, don't come freak out at us. This is preliminary. This is early season. This is kind of how this is going at this point. But North Polk, a split with Waukee Northwest, Andrew. And I just checked out the stats. They've played 2 games this week. I'm going to give you a guess. How many pitchers do you think they threw in 2 games this week?
Oh, I'm gonna say 2.
Yeah, you are dead on. Hunter Cook, Reese Froggy, definitely the story with North Polk. Only guys that needed to throw this week. Andrew, what do you think our Class 3A rankers kind of seeing dropping them down 1?
Well, I love the explanation there because I think that's right. Honestly, what we've seen from teams above them, I think that's where you start to get little nitpicky going up, down. or down one, I should say. But I think there's a lot to be said when you have a team that only has two pitchers throughout the first week in two games, and that's against Waukee Northwest, and they've been a pretty solid team themselves in that 4A scene. So North Folk head to head, they did pretty good overall, and I think if I'm not mistaken, I believe they outscored the Wolves overall in that series, in that 2 game
Yes.
slate, despite having lost one of those games. So again, it just goes to show that this team is kind of more holistic in approach. But I don't know. I'm definitely don't envy the situation because North Polk certainly is a top 3 team. Again, it's just kind of semantics, I guess, at this point.
Exactly. Well, someone's got to take their spot, Andrew. Let's see who it is as we reveal our Class 3A. Number 3, Waller Catholic. What a week. We talked preseason how we really don't know much about this team. I mean, it's a big question mark, and our Class 3A ranker kind of took a risk slotting them that high at number 4 preseason. And right now, he's looking like a genius because they're off to a great start here in 2024, 4-1. And of note, when I look at these games, 2-1 in one-score games. They're getting some early action in those tight contests, which I think only values you down the stretch when you play those tight games. Obviously, their one loss coming to Dubuque Hempstead, picked up a doubleheader sweep over Cedar Rapids, Washington. They beat Dubuque Hempstead, and then they picked up a convincing win over North Scott. Andrew, they got a busy week this week with Prairie and Senior and Jefferson. What do you like here with Waller?
Well, Waller to me was a guy that from Bodie Nagelmaker and company, Will Specht have been they've been waiting in the wings, right? And I've heard a lot, and I've heard that, man, there's this team that's ready to match what the team was last year, and it's kind of hard to think of. But again, what did they do here to start the season? All 4A opponents, and they had some big scoring production here. Again, overall, make sure I bring up my notes and have it right here. Outscored those 4A teams 36-17, and they've had 2 batters with 10 or more total bases, which is, I believe, just one of 4 teams in the class that can make that statement. So I think that's where you get a lot of that individual group effort, and it truly was a group effort and a great overall. And again, that the one loss was a 1-run loss. So it's not like you can look at it and say, man, they had a dip. Are they really that legitimate? No, they truly are. Coach Tischer has done a great job of getting this team once again at the level that they were last year, and so I think they're at it again. I think they deserve that spot.
Absolutely. Waller Catholic rising to number 3 in our Class 3A Week 1 rankings. Hopping into number 2, where I'm not going to lie, Andrew, while you were talking, I misclicked and I revealed it, but it should be no surprise, honestly. Western Dubuque at number 2, just one game for the defending Class 3A champs, and it was a really, really good win over Beckman Catholic, 15-6. Not much action here. They've got PV and CR Wash this week, as well as it looks like Hempstead. What did we learn though in that one game with Beckman Catholic?
We learned that this team is gonna be back and back again. I mean, we talked about it with Heelan. We talked about it with other teams. I mean, they're here. And again, last year they ended with 3 guys in the top 10 in hits and total bases. And again, they come back. Those guys come back. So what you have here is just a very, very veteran-laden squad overall, and you know what? They've got a lot of heat to them, and so we've learned that this offense can strike really, really quickly. You give a walk, it turns into 2 runs. I think Western Dubuque was the best team, I would argue, across the entire state at turning a walk into runs. I know 4A we can get into a bunch of those, but in 3A I think they'd be one of the best teams, if not the best, in terms of producing free bases directly into runs, and that's what they did here in their first game.
Absolutely, which means at number 1 and staying number 1 is Marion. Kind of a roller coaster of a week. They get a nice one over Iowa City West to start the year, and then they play in an absolute barn burner against Xavier, where they end out on top. The good teams find a way to win, and Marion has done that so far. Each game, Andrew, they've used 4 pitchers in each game, so they're showing their depth early. They're showing they've got arms ready to roll. Marion, taking a look at what kind of week they have coming up. Looks like Grinnell in a doubleheader and South Tama in a doubleheader. So looking to stay strong. Marion, they're a team we talked extremely high of in the preseason. Number one in our Class 3A preseason offense, number one in our Class 3A pitching staff, and for good reason, Marion staying at number one.
Yeah, and again, what, you can't really fault them, too much overall. I mean, they've only had a few games, and of course, winning both of those games is absolutely. Again, Xavier's a tough team. You go up and you put up a really strong outing against them, plus 4A's Iowa City West. I mean, in the end, you gave up 11, but even though 10 of those came in one game, but I mean, ultimately, they're off to a good start. They were close to making double digits in both of their outings. So yeah, it's for me not. It's easy to see how this team I believe is an easy number one right now. Again, tough to battle through a lot of it, but their schedule is going to really tell them where they're going to track to. But again, they have enough talent there, and I think the depth is what's going to carry them further. So watch that. Jake Miller and company are going to do a great job of continuing this good run.
Absolutely. Well, a busy week in Class 3A in week one. It's only going to get busier. I'm looking for more movement next week. We're excited to track it all. Again, on the special edition of High and Tight, Class 3A fans, go check out the other rankings videos, 1A, 2A, 4A. Go check it out so you can listen to Andrew and I even more, because I know you love doing that. Class 3A fans, be sure to check in next Monday for week 2 rankings. We will see you then.